Welcome back to Fazbear Frights. This is Fetch yet again. This is the second story, which is called Lonely Freddy. Bad, Alec had always argued, was such a subjective word. With its very definition, it was determined by someone else's baseline. It was a word that served one purpose, to judge, and Alec had been judged his entire life. His first memory was a decidedly terrible one. He was in preschool and bigger than the other kids. Recognizing this advantage at an early age, he found he could move to the front of any line with surprising ease. The other kids were glad to play the games he dictated, and he never had to look for a seat at the lunch table. It was only when his preschool teacher pulled him to the side on that first memorable day that Alec was made to understand that he was bad. "You're a bully," the teacher had said to him, a word he assumed was positive, and smiled when she offered it. Instead of patting him on the shoulder like his mom would do when he ate his whole meal, his teacher shrank away in horror. In fact, it was the precise expression on his preschool teacher's face that Alec remembered most of all. More than the way the blue plastic chairs in the classroom would stick to the backs of his legs in summertime. More than the way a fresh box of unused crayons smelled under his nose. More than the way the canned peaches they served as snacks slid around on his tongue amid the sticky syrup and metallic aftertaste. Alec didn't even remember his preschool teacher's name. He simply remembered the look of horror when he didn't understand that he was bad. As he grew older, Alec came to realize that bad was defined by comparison, and that was mostly a workable construct for Alec. Until Hazel came along. Hazel, who was named after a beloved grandmother Alec had never met, Hazel, whose fine blonde ringlets were twisted up in stiff bows, Hazel, who slept through the entire night with nary a fuss. Alec was named after no one. It was a compromise between the Alexander his mom had wanted and the Eric his dad had lobbied for. Alec's curls were unruly, tamed with water from the tap and a wooden-backed brush. Alec's nights were cleaved by nightmares and bouts of loud wakefulness. For the first 5 years in his life, Alec's behavior was more or less in constant search of the walls separating good from bad. After Hazel was born, Alec jumped the wall and landed in uncharted lands. He was not as easily tracked in this new space. He was bad sometimes, yes, but more often than not, he was boundless. He went undiscovered. It was in that space that good and bad didn't exist. If there was no one guiding him to the boundaries, if there was no one watching, behavior, if anything, was an afterthought. "Maybe don't single him out as much, Meg," Alec's Aunt Giggy would say. "Kids respond so much better to positive reinforcement." Aunt Gigi had also suggested to Alec's mom that, in the same conversation, that she switch to organic milk. The added hormones in regular dairy increased aggression in kids, according to some studies. Aunt Gigi had no children and no desire for any. Alec's mom was often in the mood for advice, and her older sister was always happy to give it. "Gigi, it's not the milk," Alec's mom had argued. "They drink the same milk, and he's not aggressive, he's just... I don't know, he's in his own world. It's like the rules don't apply to him." "Well, then you know he'll be a leader when he's older. That's great," Aunt Gigi had posited. "Yeah," Alec's mom had said, "maybe. I don't know. He just doesn't seem to like other people much." "He's 10, Meg. They hate everyone." "Not everyone," his mom had argued. "Look at Gavin." "Who?" "Becca's son." "That kid who's always smiling at everyone?" "That isn't a bad thing," his mom had said. "No, it's a creepy thing," Aunt Gigi had said. "Trust me, you don't want more little Gavins running around the world. That's the kind of kid you might find standing over your bed one night holding a butcher's knife. No thanks." It was times like those that Alec wondered if he'd been born to the wrong sister, and Aunt Gigi was really his mom. But his turned-up nose and blonde hair, like hay, were dead ringers for his mom. No question. It was also times like these that Alec wished she wasn't so good at eavesdropping. His parents had both warned him about it many times, but inevitably he'd find himself perched at the top of the staircase, listening to the conversations no one really tried that hard to hide. It was almost like they wanted him to hear. Eavesdropping was how he'd found out about the plan. Alec probably should have seen it coming. It was April, after all. The magical miracle month, otherwise known as the month their precious Hazel was born. Alec got a day, the 18th day of August to be precise. That was his special day when his parents pretended like he wasn't a problem. But Hazel? Hazel got a full 30 days of adoration. "Someone's got a special day coming up in 2 weeks," his dad would say. "Are you excited for your party?" his mom would ask. And Hazel's eyes would glitter and she'd act like it was all too much fuss, and his parents would eat it up. She'd earned it, they would say. She should enjoy it. Then they'd look at Alec and wait for him to agree, which he rarely did. Why bother? It's not like it would change a thing, she'd still get the party. Maybe it would have been decent of him to be nice to Hazel once in a while, but Alec just couldn't see giving his parents the satisfaction. So when he overheard his parents discussing the plan, he was frankly surprised it had taken them this long to come up with it. They must have been behind on their reading. "It's in Chapter 5. Have you gotten to Chapter 5 yet?" Alec's mom asked his dad across the kitchen table when they stirred up their decaf coffee that night. "I thought Chapter 5 talked about letting the child choose his own road," his dad said. That tone of exasperation in his voice was becoming more of a regular thing. No, that's from the glowing child," corrected his mom. "I'm talking about the planner. This doctor says the glowing child's theories are all wrong." Alec remembered the glowing child method well. Apparently that author believed every child was simply a blob of clay waiting to be self-molded, which involved some completely bonkers theories like letting Alec rename himself. So he decided on Captain Thunderpants and spent the entire week farting around the house and claiming he couldn't help it, it was his namesake. That wasn't as ridiculous as the time they read that they needed to plant a garden with him so he could nurture something, or the time that they were told to go camping as a family to get back to their familial core. The garden experiment ended when Alec buried his mom's wedding ring in the soil to see if it would grow more diamonds. The camping trip dissolved into a sort of Lord of the Flies situation after Hazel got a mosquito stuck up her nose, and Alec may or may not have convinced her it would lay eggs in her nasal passage. That trip didn't really have a chance after that. "Honestly, Meg, the more we read, the more I'm convinced that none of these so-called doctors know what the heck they're talking about," his dad said. But Alec's mom was not one to be deterred. "Well, Ian, what's the alternative? Do we give up?" This wasn't the first time Alec had heard a conversation like this one. It seemed to happen in the spaces between every other book that his parents would read to try to understand why their son was just so different than them. It wasn't the first time Alec had heard this sort of conversation, and yet it would form the same hard stone in his stomach every single time, because no matter how many books they read, or gardens they made him plant, or organic milk they poured down his throat, the one thing they never tried was talking to him. "Of course we don't give up," his dad said to his mom, whipping his little teaspoon around the sides of his coffee mug until Alec imagined it formed a little decaf whirlpool around the ceramic. "Just ask me," Alec whispered, and for just a second, for once in all of his 15 years, his parents were both silent, and he thought maybe they'd heard him. "Just ask me what's the matter." If they'd asked, he might have said, "I'm not like you and I'm not like Hazel, and that should be okay." But his parents simply went on talking. "You just need to skip ahead to Chapter 5, his mom said. "Can't we just skip ahead to the part where you tell me what we're supposed to be doing?" his dad said. "Just read the chapter, Ian. The party's next weekend, and I really think we need to lay some groundwork before Saturday." His dad sighed so heavily Alec could hear it from the stairs, which is how he knew his dad would once again read a useless book about some useless method for helping them to understand their enigma of a child. It was the same every time. And because his parents always stashed their collection of parenting books in some super secret location Alec had never been able to discover, he'd be starting from a disadvantage like always, watching the plan and Chapter 5's contents unfold over the course of the next week. Upstairs, in the Jack and Jill bathroom that separated Alec's room from Hazel's, he stared in the mirror and tried to see himself the way his parents did. They saw the same blonde hair, the same light green eyes, the same jaw set in rigid determination to never hang open in amazement, to never break into an unexpected smile. Alec was nothing if not deliberate. It was only Hazel who occasionally took him by surprise. "Are you okay?" she asked from her doorway, and he fixed his face in annoyance, but he was a little too late in doing so, and he was afraid she'd seen him startled. "Why wouldn't I be?" he asked, leveling her with the same type of question he always asked. He had mastered the art of deflection. Hazel shrugged and grabbed her toothbrush, playing at being nonchalant too, but she wasn't nearly as good at it as he was. "Mom and Dad are acting weird again," she said, shorthand for the explanation. She meant, Mom and Dad are picking on you again, but Alec wasn't so easily fooled. His sister was the worst of them. She conned everyone else with her questions that pretended to be innocent, and her smile might have made anyone else think she meant it. "Don't worry," he said, "I'm sure it won't affect your party." He'd meant for it to be a slight on her, but she misunderstood, and thought he actually cared. "I don't really care that much about the party, you know," she said, looking at his reflection in the mirror instead of looking directly at him. That's how he knew she was lying. She started to brush her teeth, and Alec took a moment to study her as she looked down into the sink to spit. It's almost like she was able to will every part of herself to be perfect. Her hair never frizzed, her nose never ran, her freckles were evenly spaced as though they'd been painted on by a steady hand. Even her teeth were straight. She'd probably never need braces. Alec had started to believe he'd never get his braces off. "Don't be dumb," he finally said. "Of course you care about your stupid party." Her face flushed a perfectly even shade of pink. "I bet not that many people will come," she said. Alec couldn't even muster a response to such a ridiculous plea for fake sympathy. He just snorted. "Yeah, okay," he said, and left her to finish swishing the toothpaste from her mouth. The day of getting his own bathroom in his own house with his own rules and no one to wonder why he was so different from them, that day couldn't come soon enough. Stars had begun to dot the sky when Alec's trance was broken by the creak of the bathroom door on Hazel's side. He waited for the interruption to pass, but the longer he waited, the more it became clear that Hazel wasn't in there to go to the bathroom. After another few seconds, the door to his room from the bathroom opened a crack, and in spilled the blonde curls of his sister as she broke a cardinal rule. "Get out," he said, and she snatched her head back into the bathroom, startled. But that didn't last. Instead, she opened the door a little wider, and to Alec's utter disbelief, she dared to take a step inside his room. He watched her look around for a second as though she'd entered a strange new world, and in a way, she had. If he'd ever suspected that she snuck in here when he wasn't around, the question was answered by the way she stared around her now. She was the rule follower, even when no one was looking. "You've a death wish," he said, and he could hear her swallow. Still, she took another step toward him. He had a couple of options. The usual verbal intimidation wasn't working. He could use brute force. Pain was an excellent motivator. He could play at charging her, whip the covers off of himself, and lunge out of the bed just far enough to chase her off. Or he could exercise psychological trickery. He could lie there, perfectly still, saying not even a single word more. He could watch her, as closely as he was watching her now, wait for her to get close to achieve whatever insane goal she must have for coming in here and defying all logic, and watch her courage falter the deeper she ventured into his room. Maybe it was the thrill of exerting that level of control over the situation, or maybe he was curious to see what she'd do. Either way, he opted for the third option, and he waited. Strangely, for as closely as he studied her, Hazel studied him just as closely back. She took another step toward his bed, then another, and though he could tell she was trembling, he could see from the second she popped her head in, she continued to walk forward. It wasn't until she was just a couple of steps from his bed that he noticed she was holding something. She took the last 2 steps fast, as though her courage was expiring, and set the thing on the foot of Alec's bed. Then she took 2 steps backward, spinning on her heel, and sprinted back into the bathroom, pulling the door to his bedroom closed behind her. Alec stared at the book at the foot of his bed for a long time before he finally picked it up. It was green with bold white lettering, the title precisely centered and slightly raised from the jacket. It was flagged with a bright pink sticky note right at the start of Chapter 5, and when he opened it, written in the fine pencil script of his mother's careful hand, were notes for his dad, and her to follow in the days leading up to Golden Hazel's party. Defying their parents, defying all logic and rules and self-interest, Hazel had stolen the planner from their parents' secret library while they slept, and she had shared it with him. Alec's heart raced as he read through the carefully prescribed steps of Chapter 5, the method that promised to turn their bad child good and achieve the familial harmony his parents had read over and over was achievable. Then, when he was done thumbing through the pages his father hadn't yet bothered to read but had agreed to try out on their problematic firstborn, Alec stared at the closed bathroom door his sister had gathered the courage to open, knowing the wrath she'd surely incur. He wondered for the rest of the night about why she had done it. What sort of game was she playing? What kind of sorcery was she practicing, trying to lull him into a false sense of security? Then he allowed his memory to fall backward. He retraced the times he'd confused her in the past, the moments he'd simply assumed she was attempting to throw him off his game. There was the time she baked him cookies in her toy oven, after his parents had ignored his pleas for sweets at the grocery store. There was the one moment during the doomed camping trip when she'd laughed at an unintentional joke he'd made, even as she clawed desperately at her nose for the rogue mosquito. There was that one Mother's Day where she'd added his name to the card because he'd forgotten. Alec stared out his window for the rest of the night, until the dotted stars gave way to the blue dawn before sunrise. It was too tempting to believe that his sister had brought him the book because an alliance had suddenly seemed like a good idea. 10 years of watching the uncanny spells she could cast on his parents and the rest of the world had taught him she wasn't to be so easily trusted. No, he thought, as night crept into day, this is just another trick. She'd been able to fool everyone else but him up to this point. A phony peace offering wasn't about to trick him into thinking she was suddenly on his side. Still, it unsettled him a little that he didn't know what exactly she was up to. There was only one way to solve that mystery. "I'll play along," he whispered to himself. "She'll show her cards eventually." "You're making it too complicated," Hazel said. It seemed she was taking to this new alliance with surprising comfort. They were sitting by the pool in the backyard, their feet dangling in the chlorinated water as the sun beat against their backs. Alec didn't need a mirror to know his neck was starting to glow pink. "What are you talking about? It's the perfect plan," he said. Alec was in such a habit of coldly dismissing his sister, it was exceptionally difficult to pretend to take her seriously. But if he was going to discover whatever trap it was she was trying to lure him into, he had to be convincing. Strangely, though, in pretending to take her advice, he was starting to see her differently. It was weird the way this person he was so closely related to was suddenly becoming whole in front of him, like he'd been living with a hologram this whole time. She was a completely formed con artist. "So, let me get this straight," she said, rolling her eyes skyward. "Your big plan to get Mom and Dad to stop thinking you're a total sociopath is to act like a total sociopath." After reading Chapter 5 the night before, Alec learned that the plan was a grossly simplistic take on the teenaged brain. If parents wanted a well-behaved, predictable child, they simply needed to treat them as the opposite of that. It was the worst in hokey reverse psychology, and nothing irked Alec more than having his intelligence insulted. So his counterplan was simple. He'd just act worse. Way, way worse. He was pretending, of course. He knew his counterplan was a terrible one. But he needed Hazel to be the one to come up with the idea, not him. It was the only way to make her believe he was falling for her gesture of sibling love. Once her guard was down, he'd be able to figure out what she was actually up to. "How am I the sociopath in this scenario?" he asked, trying hard not to actually feel offended. "It's just an act," he reminded himself. "It's just an act." "They think the best way to make me good is to treat me like I'm bad," Alec added in mock outrage. "If you ask me, that's pretty sociopathic." Now he was fake arguing that fake acting bad was the best way to counteract his parents' fake anger at his real bad behavior. It was all getting very meta. Alec could feel a headache forming behind his eyes. "Look," said Hazel, suddenly sounding older than her 10 years. "Don't take this the wrong way, but you've been sort of losing your touch." "My touch?" Alec said, putting his hand on the hottest part of his neck to try and shield it. Only yesterday, Hazel would have been terrified to be this blunt with him. Maybe he really was losing his knack for intimidation. "You used to be pretty good at hiding it," she said, and she looked hard at him, so she knew he was waiting for him to catch on. When he didn't answer, she sighed and said, "You used to get away with a lot more." "How's that my fault?" he said, not really liking the way he sounded pouty. "If anything, it's your fault." She blinked at him slowly. "They only started to think I was the bad one when they realized you were the good one." Hazel looked down at the water, and this time he thought maybe he saw something of the old Hazel, the one who seemed to tiptoe around him with an apology on her lips, like it was a lost cause thinking they'd ever be friends. To Alec's great amazement, he felt a twinge of remorse for that, a feeling he quickly buried. "Okay, what's your counterplan?" he asked. Her solution was too simple. "Be good," she said. Alec laughed. What else could he do? "That's your master class in playing our parents? Reverse psychology?" She shrugged. "If you're a little bit better and I'm a little bit worse, maybe it'll neutralize the attention enough for them to leave us alone for a change." Alec let his jaw do that thing where it dropped. He let his body experience the full shock he had restrained for so long, and he did it in front of the least likely a person, Golden and Hazel. The child who did what she was told to when she was told to do it. The child who got the straight A's and the coordinated piano fingers, the dish clearer and the classroom helper, the easy parent-teacher conference, the perfect child. The perfect child. Maybe she didn't want to be perfect anymore. How had it never occurred to him that his lot in the family was just as burdensome as hers? Why had that tiny sparkle in her eye never caught his attention, the one that said, "Let's trade places for today"? When had she stopped being Golden Hazel and simply started being Hazel, a kid? All the more reason not to trust her, he thought, his resolve hardening. She was tired of pretending to be the good one. She was ready to advance to full bad kid status, which meant she was definitely up to something. "Do you think you can do it?" he asked, not meaning it as a challenge, but an actual question. Be bad? Can you be good, she asked, and from her it definitely was a challenge. They agreed to test her theory that night as a sort of trial run. Their parents were obviously committed to their own experiment prescribed by the planner. They'd been on Alec's case all day. They'd scolded him for failing to put his clothes from the clothesline. They'd admonished him for playing video games before completing his homework, even though it was spring break. They'd even lectured him on the importance of flossing, a strange battle to pick after a spotless checkup during his most recent dental cleaning. By the time dinner rolled around, Alec's face hurt from smiling. His neck was sore from nodding. His blood had boiled so many times that day, he was surprised he hadn't cooked from the inside out. He'd swallowed every scolding, never caving to the temptation of sassing his parents. And true to her word, at each confrontation throughout the day, Hazel had been there to take a portion of the burden away from Alec. She'd chosen that morning to show their mom the less-than-stellar grade on her spelling test from the previous week. She'd accidentally dropped her dad's shirts in the mud when she'd pulled them from the clothesline, and in response to the great flossing debate of Monday afternoon, she'd marked a first for herself. Hazel mouthed off. "How many cavities did you have at your last checkup?" she muttered, within earshot of her mother. "Young lady, what's gotten into you today?" their mother said. And as Alec and Hazel rounded the corner to retreat to their separate bedrooms after dinner time, they'd tapped fingertips and hid their smiles. But as soon as Alec closed his own bedroom door, he'd reviewed every moment from the day to analyze his sister's actions. The way she'd jump in too readily to deflect the scolding meant for him. The way she'd been so ready with a smart comeback to their mom. The time she winked conspiratorially at him at the dinner table. It was all just a little too perfect. This little show she was putting on for him. "You're not clever enough to play this game," he thought that night before he went to bed. "You're in way over your head, sis." He had 5 years on her of playing the role of the bad seed. If she thought she was going to usurp that title, she was in for a rude awakening. The next day was more or less a repeat of the previous one. When their parents mentioned Alec's lack of manners at the breakfast table, Hazel burped. When Alec's dad accused him of scratching the side of the car with his bike, Hazel unapologetically took the blame. When Alec's mom wondered aloud when the last time was that Alec had ingested a vegetable, Hazel's quick response to ask when the last time their parents had cooked an edible one. That night, as Hazel joined Alex on his perch at the top of the stairs, they listened to their parents puzzle through the past 2 days. "Is it just me, or does Hazel seem to be going through a phase?" their mom whispered to their dad, teaspoons clinking against the sides of their coffee mugs. "I thought it was just my imagination at first," their dad agreed. Their parents' awe was unmistakable. "Did you hear what she said to me this afternoon?" their mom asked. "She actually said she thought I was starting to look haggard." "Haggard, Ian? Do I look haggard?" "No, but you sound haggard," Alec muttered. Hazel had to stifle her laugh, but Alec was too irritated to find the humor. His parents were infuriating. Was it really so unbelievable that Hazel could be even nastier than the predictably rotten Alec? "Well, could anyone blame you for being haggard?" their father said. "Ooh, wrong answer," Hazel whispered, and this time Alec did find the humor, and his laugh caught him off guard. "So then I do look haggard," their mom said, and Alec could hear a teaspoon clinking faster and faster against the ceramic. One of them was compulsively stirring. "Of course not, Meg. Can we try to focus on the kids?" he said, and their mom let out a single, uncharitable ha. "Oh, now look who's ready to be the adult," said their mom, and Alec and Hazel leaned back on their step, grimacing. "That's not going to go over well," said Alec. "Really, Meg? I just think that—" "Oh, I know what you think. You've made that pretty clear." "Good grief, Ian, grow up." But when Alec looked over at Hazel, she was simply smiling, as though the whole thing was going according to plan. Of course, from her perspective, it was. Then she turned her smile at him. If Alec hadn't been able to see right through her, he might have been tempted to believe it was genuine. If he were the type to fall for such an obvious manipulation, he might have even felt a hint of warmth toward her, a sister simply in search of an actual relationship with her brother. It was kind of cute, he thought, how she believed she could outsmart him. Okay, their dad said, and Alec heard him pull in a deep breath. "We can't turn on each other." Their mother sighed. "You're right, let's just go to bed. It's been a long day. Oh, and I can't find the book, FYI. "Forget it," their dad said. "We'll look for it in the morning." 2 sets of chair legs scraped against the kitchen tiles, and Alec and Hazel jumped to their feet and slipped into their rooms just as the light on the stairs switched on, announcing their parents' approach. Lying in bed, Alec thought through all the variations of his own plan, the counter-to-the-counter plan, as it were. Tomorrow was party planning day. He'd heard his mom remind his dad about it 1,000 times. Not that it mattered, since he'd be at work and she would be dragging Alec and Hazel along to meet Aunt Gigi at the pizzeria instead. It was there that Alec would really ramp up his reconnaissance. It was there that Alec would really ramp up his reconnaissance. If he was going to discover what Hazel was actually up to, he would discover in the place where all these plans and counterplans were to culminate. He could think of no other reason for why Hazel was so determined to sabotage her own birthday party by allowing Alec to be, well, himself. It had something to do with her birthday on Saturday. Whatever she was planning, it would all go down then. Alec's only real option was to sit back and let Hazel show her cards. It was a matter of time before it happened, and though she'd proven herself more cunning than he'd originally given her credit for, she was no evil genius. That title was reserved for Alec. Sometime after Alec heard his parents' bedroom door shut for the night, the door from the bathroom he shared with Hazel opened, and she poked her head inside. "Today was fun," she said, and Alec made a quick switch to his conspiring brother act. "Yeah," he said. "Nice job with the cooking dig," he said. "Thanks." Hazel laughed shyly. "Oh, please," Alec thought, but he managed to keep from rolling his eyes. "Hey, you don't think we're gonna, break them or anything, do you?" Hazel said. "Nah," he said. "They can handle it. Trust me, I've put them through a lot worse." Hazel nodded, then gave him one more shy smile before shutting the door and padding across the bathroom back to her own room. It was a few minutes before Alec noticed that he was smiling too. Not smiling because he was recounting all the ways he'd beaten his sister at their own game. Not smiling because he'd exposed her for the fraud she is, for their parents and friends and everyone else in the world to see. Not yet, anyway. He was smiling because he was enjoying her company. "Get a grip, Alec," he scolded himself. Then he repeated to himself over and over that she wasn't as good as she pretended to be, that she was only using him as a means to an end. He reminded himself that this alliance was false and temporary, that once he'd revealed her as a fraud, they'd go back to their separate ends of the bedroom, and Alec could proceed unfettered in doing whatever it was he wanted to do, only this time without the constant comparison to Golden Hazel. Then he wiped that pathetic smile from his face and fell asleep with vengeance on his mind. And that's part 1 of Lonely Freddy. 2 more to go. This one's a really slow burner. So far we haven't even heard anything FNAF related, but I promise it does get better. And it starts actually right away in the next part, so stay tuned for that. For now, I'm gonna go. Bye. I still don't have an outro. Maybe I should fix that. Alright, yeah, bye.